Kaja'mite, a mineral that has a short but intriguing history. It, like the curse of flesh, was needed to create a very important part of the history of Azeroth that we, as players, get to see. It was the mineral that led to the goblins rising from the bonds that once held them. Now, several other creators have gone over the curse of flesh, the rising of other races, and how Kaja'mite had its effect on the goblins. However, I will not be delving into it myself. I will instead look to the future, or what is the future that we may be seeing, through the lens of Kaja'mite and other things that we have mostly ignored. To start, where does it come from? And why does Kaja'mite work with things that are not fully of Azeroth's being? So champions, please, have a potion ready, have your armor repaired, and please, let us dive in. Kaja'mite is definitely an interesting, for now we will say, mineral, being one of only 4 minerals or metals to have the suffix of ITE. However, it is the only one of these 4 that does not have a direct tie to a important force or being on Azeroth or in the order of the world. Azerite, the other mineral, is the very embodiment of the world soul of Azeroth. It was the blood of Azeroth, which was the entire reason for the war during Battle for Azeroth. Serenite, the first metal that we will dive into, was created with the blood of Yogg-Saron, hence the name of Serenite. It is connected to the old god of insanity and incomprehensible horror. Some call him the old god of death, which sadly is not exactly true. But another outlier could be seen as Arcanite, a non-native metal. Again, it is man-made. It is created when an enchanter infuses Elementium with raw arcanic power. But it is still imbued with that arcane power that ties it to an order of arcane that is needed to balance the world. So, it still falls in with the other 3, leaving Kaja'mite as the only metal or mineral that isn't tied to some larger thing in the mythos. So I ask you, dear listeners and viewers, why? Could there be something more to this? Now, I will not continue on that question just for now. However, I will instead go into the mineral, as I will call it, for now, by its complete self. Its effect and locations are notes that we will definitely be returning to. However, the currently only known locations of it being mineable and collectible in its raw crystalline mineral form would be the coasts of Zandalar and Kazan, and we see both of these at 2 separate points, implying they could both be active at the same time, yes, but I would like to point out that Kazan is very sparsely mentioned in all of 11.1. You go to Zandalar instead of Kazan, actually, but Kazan is mentioned through the Mythic Dungeon rotations. Its appearance in the game is a crystal or gem like agates and quartz. However, its bright green is something I would like to draw attention to. It's radioactive illumination is something that is intriguing. The way I have connected this and what has drawn me to it was the recent escapades of Pandaria with time running. Chris Metzen is very interesting with his storytelling. He loves to leave little sprinkles that let us see things when reverse connected to make sense. During the time running of Pandaria, nothing was changed, which implies there's something there he wants us to remember, and in Pandaria, there was an old god, Yasharaj, who was ripped out of Azeroth. And as many may remember, Zandalar and Kazan are two islands around where he was ripped from. He was ripped from Azeroth, and where he was ripped left a hole, a wound in the very world, and that became the Well of Eternity. A font of what remained of his energy and other energies that coalesced into a very strange, but very familiar, bright green, and would be interesting to note that when the sundering occurred, the remnant became the maelstrom. Now, a interesting note there could Kaja'mite be the coalesced energies, crystallized like blood, similar to that of Azurite and Serenite? It would make sense seeing how Serenite's effect on the mind has happened. For those who may not have played through the Wrath of the Lich King or may have forgotten, there were Serenite mines that were needed by the Lich King to create his large ice-crowned citadel. But to build it, he could not let his Death Knights, or whatever his minions were, just mine the Serenite. It was the very blood of an old god, and it had very damning properties. With enough exposure to Serenite and Serenite gas, anyone, even undeads with no brains, such as skeletons and ghouls, would be driven so insane they would only mimic the name Yogg Saron. Now, since it alters the mind, that is an interesting note for Serenite, but Kaja'mite's history says it did the same. In the past, goblins were just as, low in intellect and dumb as early troll civilization. They were just weaker. They were subjugated by them. But once they were exposed to Kaja'mite over several generations, they became well beyond the intelligence of the trolls. And we have then seen them relatively together in that regard. In the very beginning of Kazan, we know the Goblin player character makes more Zandalari slaves, mine more Kaja'mite. However, they're much more taking breaks than goblins would have, possibly implying that is why they haven't changed. And another reinforcement of the connection between Kaja'mite and Serenite with Azurite and Arcanite. All three, minus the Arcanite, having some massive change when exposed to somebody for a long period of time. Now, Azurite would be an easy thing to dismiss this claim. However, we haven't seen Azurite's full alteration. So it is very likely Azurite could shift things and make things more chaotic and wild, unbalanced, like the very world of Azeroth that we know. So adventurers, could it be that there is more to Kaja'mite than we may know? Interesting enough, Kaja'mite had a major role since the goblins did return in 11.1. However, there was hints of maybe some more things at play. See, Undermine was originally talked about during the 8th expansion for the game, Battle for Azeroth, and that was a interesting note. The Siren Isles, which was previously cut content for the said expansion, returned in 11.0.5. And then we had 11.1 being undermined. It is very possible that Chris Messon just wanted to bring these ideas back and re-update them. That would be well enough, but then to have us still go back in 11.1 to Zandalar and Claymore Kaja'mite that, to my knowledge, was never there previously to the patch, is well enough to be noted. As well as, we know in 11.1.5, the horrific visions of N'Zoth will return, implying more connections to the 8th expansion of BFA. Now, goblins played a major role in the early story of BFA, and that is why Undermined was originally talked about, as well as they played a role in the Siren Isles. Though it was very minor, could it be that we see more maybe on the horizon with them? Maybe. But I would like to take Kaja'mite away from just the goblins and return to it being connected possibly to the old gods. Zandalar is home to a old god of sorts. Gahun is a composite of the scraps of Yasharaj and the blood of other old gods and their minions and their servants. They're from the smallest Cathraxi to possibly even N'Zoth himself. Gahun was a composite old god in Zandalar. Now, Kazan itself was never directly tied to an old god, but given its proximity to the Maelstrom, it could be assumed there may have been a tie to it. As well as, we do know that Uldir was present in Zandalar prior to all of it. So, Gahun would have been there for a long time. But it seems that with the return of the Siren Isles, Undermine, and the coming of the horrific visions in 11.1.5, it seems they may be trying to push us not to look at the areas, but beyond that, to the tie to Battle for Azeroth, and the way it connected us to the Void somewhat. Now it is time for the real question, my fellow heroes and champions. What if Kaja'mite is the mineral that was left over from the Well of Eternity? Kaja'mite being connected to the old gods in the Well of Eternity is a very far-reaching grab and leap of logic. I am well assured of that by many people. But if you will let me explain, I may be right. We know from Chronicles that there was supposed to be 4 old gods, however, with Gahun being 5, that threw it kind of out. On top of, they said 4 imprisoned. Yasharaj wasn't imprisoned, and Gahun was a composite, therefore not seen as an old god. So was there another old god that's been imprisoned somewhere we were not made aware of? Now, that seems like a reach, but that could be the hint that they are trying to tell us through Kaja'mite. Kaja'mite itself is a unique mineral, as it's the only other mineral that we have been able to tie to both the Black Blood, which is itself old god, and the Dark Heart, a void artifact that comes from the void itself, that recently has been tied to other old gods. In a timeline sense, we know that Xal'atath has been around Cthulhu's prison during Season of Discovery, so Cthulhu can be checked off the list. We know that she has Yogg-Saron's power after the events of the Dragonflight Dawn of the Infinite, I apologize. That we see that Iridikron uses the Dark Heart to absorb the hunger of Galakrond, and it was a power that came from Yogg-Saron. And hearkening back to the point of the Pandaria time running, Yasharaj was drained, meaning he is done. There is nothing for Southhalf to claim there. So then that leaves only N'Zoth. N'Zoth, we can assume she would get some power later on. We know that Ajara will be returning soon from the same Siren Isles, so it is likely that she may have something from N'Zoth already empowering her. So, would that leave a new gold god? Yes, but Yasharaj makes more sense there, and I will concede that there may not be another old god, that it may just be Yasharaj's connection, as the Dark Heart absorbs the power of Void. Now, if we were to assume that N'Zoth's power could be mimicked by the Void of Beladar, or through some other means, that would again leave only Yasharaj. And with his connection to the Well of Eternity, and what I assume to be Kaja'mite's connection to it, this would allow it to not only mix and create the weaponry we see used by Gallywix in Undermine and the liberation of Undermine Raid in 11.1, but would explain why it was able to repair and be used to repair the Dark Heart. It is a strange thing to connect it. But when you look at all of it, it does make sense. Now, what could be seen is that Kaja'mite, being a mineral and not a metal like Serenite, could be Azeroth's influence on it. When it has been over millennia at least since Yasharaj was ripped and the Realm of Eternity was created, and then even more since then for it to reach us now. So what if it is a twisted version, or a more purified version of an old god's power? We know N'Zoth's ability must correlate with this, however, and not Yasharaj's. Each old god used a different way to corrupt the being. The two we have talked about previously, being Yogg-Saron and Yasharaj, are very dynamically different. Yogg-Saron corrupts and turns them insane till all they can do is just follow him like a sheep following its shepherd. Yasharaj corrupted by sin, and we see this be again pointed out by the 7 heads of Yasharaj, and the 7 prime Shah, all being correlated to some sin of Christian mythology. However, N'Zoth's is the most seen as the reverse of Kaja'mite, not Yasharaj. N'Zoth's corruption was the way he would corrupt the morals and the mind and make them seek him out. And Kaja'mite would kind of do the opposite. N'Zoth's would plant and corrupt through visions, the horrific visions that we will see return in 11.1.5. And proof of this was Illyria in the Stormwind vision, becoming the darkest version of herself. However, in the same vision, we also see a cat, a normal house cat, become so vicious that it just kills and begs you to help it kill after being so hungry. But for the Horde, you had the Orgrimmar vision. Your character would be seen wimpish and crying in a cage, and Thrall would be a monster. It is strange to see how it would almost be the opposite, as Kaja'mite, compared to how he made your character appeared, are completely opposite. Kaja'mite made goblins less wimpish, less subjugatable. It made them more self-reliant. However, N'Zoth did the opposite. He twists your morals to make you more reliant on him, like a toxic date. Yet, Kaja'mite opposite? Could it be that the reason why Kaja'mite can interact with the black blood, known blood of an old god, or a major minion of one at least, and the dark heart, is because it itself is of the void in some nature, but only purified by Azeroth. Azeroth has had the abilities to fight the old gods before, as we know with N'Zoth in the very heart of Azeroth, we took through the Battle of Azeroth against the old gods. Could it be that Kaja'mite is a very important metal that we have been sleeping on? That is the Spitball I am relaying to you, champions, and I do hope you enjoy this little story, as well as you will be able to discuss what I have said and may be able to make your own theories, and even be able to prove me wrong if I am wrong. To all champions who have made this far, have a great night, have a great day, and may you fight the visions. Your mind is only as strong as it can be. So heroes, gear up, fight well, and remember, for Azeroth. This was Spitball episode 2, and I do thank you for listening to me. I do know it has been a while, and this is a bit of a different take on Spitball, so I do hope everyone who's listened has had a wonderful time. I really want y'all, if you can, to give me a like, give me a subscribe, comment. You loved it, you hate it. You don't like this, go ahead, I understand. But this is me no longer as the, no longer in this mask, just saying thank you for your time, and thank you for listening. And again, for Azeroth.